Hello, everyone, and welcome to the darkest hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Tonight we step across thresholds where the past refuses to rest. We explore moments trapped in objects, in time, all reaching out desperate for attention. You'll hear voices that whisper from sealed rooms, offering warnings or mundane observations, proving that necessity can make us neighbors with the unknown. These are not just tales of isolated terror. They're accounts of shared visions, physical sickness, and the agonizing truth that sometimes there really is something there. So, let's get started, shall we? You know, when you're in college, you'll take just about any job if the cash is good enough. I was 20, trying to scrape together tuition money in Wilmington, and I found myself in a bizarre corner of Newcastle, Delaware, the historic district. Old money, old houses, and even older secrets, as it turns out. This story is about one of those jobs, house sitting for the Vandermeer family. A sprawling, imposing 3-story Queen Anne. Think dark, varnished wood that swallowed the light, heavy velvet drapes, and that scent that all truly ancient homes have. The job itself was easy. Keep the lights on, water the ferns, don't let the cat die. Mrs. Vandermeer, a woman who wore more pearls than necessary, had one other very specific rule. The cellar, she said, nodding toward a discreet, unmarked door tucked away in the back of the service hall. It's sealed. The door is locked, bolted from the outside. You're never to go down there, Veronica, ever. I shrugged it off. Basements in these colonial homes are usually just spiders and damp concrete. They said it was unstable, too old, which seemed plausible enough. I accepted the hefty check, waved goodbye to the owners, and settled in to read for my history final. The house was definitely quiet. It wasn't the silence that came with a peaceful home. It was the silence of a tomb. I started getting headaches about a week into my stay there. Not typical tension headaches, mind you. These were deep, throbbing pressure headaches, like my skull was being slowly squeezed in a vice. They were accompanied by a low-level persistent nausea that Tums couldn't touch. I figured it was the stress of exams, or maybe the stale air in this old place. But then I started to notice a pattern. The minute I moved away from the main kitchen area, the nausea would cease. When I was in the sunlit parlor, I felt almost normal. But whenever I walked into the back service hall, the one with the sealed cellar door, it hit me like a physical wave. The pressure would instantly intensify, making me feel dizzy, like standing too close to a massive subwoofer. I remember thinking at the time that maybe there was some kind of gas leak, or maybe I was just highly sensitive to the low-frequency hum of the antiquated furnace. I even looked it up later, the concept of infrasound, frequencies below human hearing that can supposedly induce anxiety, nausea, even visual distortions. I clung to that as my explanation because the alternative felt too ridiculous for a college girl in the 90s. The visual distortions were next. It started almost subtly. Glancing down the hall, I'd catch a flicker near the bottom of the basement door, where the wood didn't quite meet the floor. A quick, dark shape, like a heavy shadow, racing across the baseboards. When I looked directly, it would be gone. Nothing but dust motes dancing in the faint light. But dancing, nonetheless. These moments grew bolder. I'd be scrubbing a pot, lost in thought, and I'd suddenly sense a presence behind me, something tall, cold. I'd whirl around, heart slamming against my ribs, and find nothing. Yet the physical feeling of oppression, the crushing weight in my chest, it would be so profound that I'd have to grip the counter to stay upright. One night, probably 3 a.m, I was in the small office adjacent to the hall, trying to finish a paper, when the pressure suddenly peaked. It was the worst headache I'd ever had, sharp, blinding, and the nausea made me gag. I slumped forward, resting my forehead on the desk. It was during this moment of absolute, agonizing sensory overload that the house responded. A single, monumental knock. It wasn't a thump. It was a heavy, deliberate, rhythmic thud, thud. It came from behind that sealed door, directly through the floorboards, beneath my feet. It didn't sound frantic. It sounded patient. It was the sound of something immense and solid, acknowledging me. It was a question, or maybe a demand. I didn't move for maybe 5 minutes. I was paralyzed, not by a ghost, but by the sheer weight of this hostile energy radiating from this spot. My college self, the one who desperately needed this paycheck, was caught in a terrifying paradox. I had to stay, but I felt like staying was going to physically break me. I realized then that whatever was sealed in that cellar wasn't content to merely be an echo. It was actively leeching something. My comfort, my focus, my physical well-being. It was trying to impose itself. It felt like an infestation. Driven by a mix of fear and an urgent need to stop the crippling feeling, I did something completely irrational. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, my 1980s edition of the Oxford English Dictionary, and I dragged it down the hall. I didn't try to open the door. I didn't try to investigate. I simply took that massive heavy thing and shoved it right against the bottom of the door, completely blocking the small crack between the wood and the stone floor. And just like that, everything seemed to stop. The pressure headaches eased immediately, like a plug had been pulled. The nausea vanished no matter where I was. The room temperature seemed to lift 10 degrees. It was a cessation so abrupt and physical that it proved, without a shadow of a doubt, that the source of distress was emanating directly through that small, negligible gap. How? Why? No idea. Even if it was simply all in my head, it's still pretty miraculous. But I can tell you, I don't think that's what was going on at all. The next morning, the Vandermeers arrived back. Mrs. Vandermeer paused in the service hall, her eyes flicking down to the heavy dictionary still blocking the cellar door. She didn't ask why it was there. She just gave me my final check and a cold, quick smile. Thank you for your service, Veronica. Everything seems quite untouched. I took the money and I left. I never learned the history of that house, and I never heard that sound again. I never saw a clear figure, either. But I'm 52 years old now, and I've never forgotten that feeling. Was it infrasound? Was it some hostile geological anomaly? I can't tell you for sure, but I know that for 2 weeks, I was paid to babysit a presence, a dark one, so physically debilitating that it only needed the tiniest crack under a locked door to make a person desperately, cripplingly ill. Whatever was down there, it wasn't a ghost you could see, but it was an entity you could feel. I moved into my apartment about 3 months ago. Top floor, corner unit, decent rent, and a view of enough pine trees to trick me into believing I wasn't living above a parking lot. That's the Pacific Northwest for you, I guess. You can be stepping on cigarette butts in one direction and staring at a postcard-worthy tree line in the other. Anyway, the night that this happened was cold. No storm or wind, but it was rainy, damp, everywhere. I was unpacking the last box I'd been pretending not to see, mostly old hiking gear and a tangled headlamp, when I heard something outside. At first, I thought that it was just someone dropping something heavy. Loud, singular thunk. Happens all the time. People in this building seem to treat the dumpster area like a basketball court. But then, it didn't stop. It just kept happening. Short, sharp impacts, uneven in timing. Not rhythmic, but not random either. Kind of frantic. I don't know. I'm not great at describing sounds. The closest thing I can compare it to is someone kicking a door while yelling through it. And yeah, I know how that sounds, but it's the closest thing I've got. I stood there for a second, waiting for it to turn into something normal. Footsteps, maybe laughter, an annoyed, "Hey man, cut it out." But nothing like that happened. Instead, the noises just kept getting louder, sharper, angrier. And then, this is the part I keep going back to, there was this voice, a woman's voice, not screaming exactly, more like trying to scream while someone was covering their mouth. A choked, muffled sound. I swear that's what it was. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself I heard. I said something like, "Seriously?" to no one, grabbed my keys and stepped outside. My apartment opens into this shared upper walkway that faces the parking lot. Straight ahead, pine trees, a strip mall glowing in the distance, and the usual gray sky. Down below, the lot itself, half lit, half shadow. And under that walkway is the building storage area. Cinder block, metal door, ugly fluorescent lights that hum like it's on life support. The sound was coming from that area. I leaned over the railing, squinting. "Hello?" I called out. Not because I expected an answer, but because that's what people do in horror movies before things go wrong. Might as well honor the classics. Nothing answered back, but I could still hear the impacts. Less frequent now. Heavier. Slower. I went down the stairs faster than I probably should have, but it's not because I'm brave. It was more because if I stayed up there listening any longer, I knew I'd freeze. And doing nothing felt worse than doing something. The closer I got to the storage door, the more obvious it was that something violent was happening, or had just happened. It stopped abruptly the second I got within maybe 10 feet. It didn't taper off or fade, it just stopped. Like someone hit pause on chaos. I stood there staring at the door, waiting for something, anything to move. A shadow, a footstep, a breath. Nothing. I didn't open the door. Look, I may be observant, but I'm not stupid. Instead, I stepped back, pulled out my phone, and called the non-emergency police line. Somehow, even that felt a little dramatic, but I didn't know what else to do. The lady who answered sounded bored until I described what I heard. Then she suddenly sounded suspicious in that, "Are you messing with me?" way. She said, "Sir, are you sure you're not calling in some kind of prank?" I repeated, "I'm not," probably 3 times. I do that when I'm nervous. Say the same phrase like I'm trying to convince myself as much as them. Eventually she sighed and said that she'd send someone out, but she sounded more annoyed than concerned. I sat on the wooden step outside my building and waited, staring at that metal door like it might blink. It took maybe 8 minutes for the police car to pull in. 2 officers stepped out. One older guy who looked tired of everything, and and one younger woman who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else but working nights in our little corner of forested suburbia. I explained everything once again. They listened without much expression. The younger officer gave the older one a look and said, "This area again." "Yeah," he muttered. I don't know why that made my stomach drop a little. Something about the way they said "again," like this wasn't just a noise complaint or someone arguing loudly. They went to check the storage room. I stayed back on the walkway stairs, feeling stupid and exposed and also weirdly hopeful that they'd find something normal, like raccoons or a drunk tenant or, hell, even a broke water heater. Anything but what I'd been imagining. But when they opened the door, the room was empty. Completely empty. No signs of a struggle or movement. The younger officer closed the door a little too quickly, like she didn't want to look at the interior longer than necessary. The officer, the older one, walked back over, rubbed the back of his neck. "You said you just moved in, right?" "Yeah," I said. 3 months. He nodded slowly. "Okay, so, look, this is going to sound strange, but you're not the first person to call in noises like that." I must have blinked at him too many times because he added, "A year ago, someone was killed in that storage room." The younger officer shot him a warning glance, but he kept going anyway. Woman in her 30s, domestic dispute, neighbors reported the sounds. No one got down here in time. He let out a long breath. And every couple of weeks since then, someone hears something. I said something real eloquent like, "Oh." He lowered his voice. "We don't get evidence of anything. Nothing physical. But the reports keep coming." I don't know what to say, so I repeated, "I'm not messing with you," even though no one had asked this time. "We know," he said simply. They took my info and they left. The lot went quiet again. Just the usual soft background hiss of wind through the pines. A sound I'd always loved, but it sort of felt different. Like something was hiding in it. I still walk past that storage door every day. And every day, I swear, I hear not noises exactly. More like the idea of noises. Echoes. Something fading in and out. It's there. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts now, but I'm also not saying I don't. I guess that's the best I can do. Out here, the trees remember things, even when the people who live next to them don't. And there are some nights when the air feels heavy, but not like that rain heavy. It sounds like the past, trying to scream through a closed door. There are some fears you grow out of. The dark, the clown in the sewer drain, and possibly the monster under your bed. And then there are fears that stay with you. They calcify, becoming a solid, unmoving pillar in the architecture of your adulthood. For me, that pillar is antique mirrors, especially the tall ones. I was 10 years old, perhaps 11, when great-aunt Clara died. I'd never met her. She was a vague, spectral figure even when she was alive. My mother's elderly relative who lived reclusively on a freezing remote stretch of lake somewhere near the Maine border. When she passed, Mother was next of kin, responsible for clearing out the property. It was a chore that she resented, driving 8 hours to wade through the remnants of a stranger's isolated life. Mother returned with a few boxes of inherited junk, yellowed linens, some chipped porcelain, and one spectacularly monstrous piece of furniture. It was a cheval mirror, standing nearly 7 feet tall, framed in heavily carved, dense mahogany that was almost black. The silvering of the glass was deeply tarnished, giving the reflection a cloudy, aged appearance, one that seemed to absorb the light rather than bounce it back. It was too big and beautiful to just toss, Mother reasoned, her voice echoing the pragmatism that usually anchored our suburban household. And it's quite valuable. It ended up in my bedroom, a suburban 10-year-old space suddenly invaded by an object that felt millennia old. The mirror's presence was immediate and oppressive. It didn't feel like furniture. It felt like a large, silent stranger staring at me. I started noticing that my room, which faced the warm afternoon sun, always felt colder now. The mirror seemed to reflect a version of my room that was dimmer. It was not the reflection itself that bothered me, but what the reflection showed behind me. I'd be sitting at my desk, meticulously copying a lesson, and in the corner of the mirror, I'd see a blur of movement. Not mine, something else. A quick, indistinct shift in the shadows behind my chair. It would make my head snap around, but when I turned, the space was always empty. The wall was bare, the door closed. Nothing. The dread didn't come from the fear of a monster, but from the horrifying realization that the glass was showing me something that didn't exist in my physical room. The mirror was showing me a truth that my reality denied. It was an object that inverted logic, and as a child, that felt paralyzing. I developed an acute physical aversion to turning around. Every part of my body told me to check, to confirm the emptiness of the room. But the fear of what the mirror would reveal if I didn't turn was a much greater terror. I became practiced at my peripheral vision, watching the mirror from the corner of my eye as I did my homework, my entire body tense and prepared to jump. The figures in the glass, they were never clear. They were always on the edge of my vision, always blurry and shapeless, like heavy gray smoke. Sometimes, if I stared hard at my own reflection, trying to see past myself, I could almost discern a tall, wavering shape near the corner of the frame, almost like someone standing just outside a heavy rainstorm, their silhouette obscured by the water. My mother, a kind but fiercely rational woman, noticed my deteriorating state. I started sleeping fully clothed, facing the wall, or else I'd spend 20 minutes arranging blankets to cover the mirror, knowing the whole time that whatever was in the glass was watching me fumble with the cloth. "Eleanor, you need to stop watching those scary movies," she'd say gently, pulling the sheet down to show me nothing was there. "It's just an old piece of furniture." She could look at it without flinching because she saw a handsome, albeit tarnished, reflection of her living room. I looked at it and saw a portal, a window into a place adjacent to mine, occupied by entities that were finally, agonizingly close. The climax of the experiences came on a miserable, rainy night. I was standing in front of the mirror trying to tie my hair, fighting the urge to look away. I was determined to face the thing. I stared into my own 10-year-old eyes, breathing shallowly. And then, with agonizing slowness, there was a blur behind me, sharpened. Standing perhaps a foot behind my reflection was a terribly tall, dark, heavy-clothed figure. And there was hair. It looked like tangled wire. It was the clearest thing I'd ever seen in the mirror. My hands froze, and the hairbrush suspended inches from my scalp. My brain screamed, "Turn around," but I couldn't. Instead, I looked back into the reflection of my own face, and the face that stared back was not mine. The eyes were dark, hollowed-out sockets. The mouth was stretched open, and there were tears, black like oil, streaming down my contorted cheeks. My reflection, the 10-year-old girl in a blue shirt, was locked behind this other thing, absolutely terrified and pleading. The next thing I remember is falling backward, screaming, scrambling across the carpet. That was the moment that I understood the mirror wasn't showing me some sort of ghost. It was just showing me evil, possibly even showing me from another perspective. Either way, I was hysterical. I couldn't articulate the screaming reflection to my mother. I could only point and sob uncontrollably. Mother saw only the dark, cloudy glass, but she saw the trauma in my face. The mirror had crossed a line, inflicting an actual psychological wound. That night, Mother called an antiques dealer. She didn't believe in hauntings, but she believed in her daughter's peace of mind and money. The price was technically irrelevant. The object had to go. I watched from the kitchen doorway the next morning as two men, thick-armed and oblivious, strapped the mirror to a dolly. As they wheeled this monstrosity toward the front door, I remember catching one final glimpse. It was just my regular, intact reflection. But the edges of the glass weren't still. They seemed like a shimmer, like water. And I looked away. I can honestly say I haven't owned a full-length mirror since. I use a small wall-mounted one. The fear is still there, I guess with any mirrors. Just that sudden, panicked urge to spin around and confirm the emptiness of the room, or not wanting to catch anything in the reflection. Great Aunt Clara's mirror taught me that sometimes the things that watch us from the peripherals, they're just waiting for us to look back before they can show up in our reflection. Maybe. Either way, I've been afraid to let go of that vigilance ever since. When I've been asked about the strangest job I've ever had, no one's expecting the story to be what it is. Maybe a bad boss, a toxic workplace. They never expect the one that actually kept me up at night. The job I couldn't quit, even though I knew deep down I was sharing those walls with something impossible. It was 1993, a year when the job market had swallowed itself whole in our corner of Massachusetts. I was 22, freshly laid off from a factory job in Leominster, and staring at a stack of bills that looked more like a retaining wall than envelopes. That's when I ended up at the Route 12 Motor Court, about a 30-minute drive outside of Fitchburg. It wasn't a motel exactly, it was a blight. 2 U-shaped buildings of crumbling vinyl siding and permanently stained carpeting. Run by a man named Duffy. Old Man Duffy, everyone called him. Crusty, perpetually smelling of cigar smoke and regret. The deal was simple. Minimum wage for the night desk shift, plus a tiny, free employee efficiency apartment tacked into the main office. I needed the free rent more than I needed to breathe. The apartment was a shoebox, but the location was the real problem. The back wall of my bedroom was shared with room 106. On my first night, Duffy made a point of nodding toward the wall as he handed me the emergency key ring. Room 106 is sealed, kid. Structural issues, used for storage, but we never open it. Hasn't seen a paying customer since '82, so leave it be. I didn't care. I was too busy calculating how many double shift weeks it would take to clear my debt. The motel's weirdness to me was the peeling wallpaper and the sound of the highway hum. Nothing supernatural, just plain depressing. I was a skeptic by nature, too pragmatic and broke to believe in ghosts. The tapping started 3 weeks into the job. It was faint, just a rhythmic thumb tap against the drywall, right where my headboard sat. It always started around 2 a.m., after the last late check-in had shuffled off and the old boiler had settled into its grumbling cycle. I tried to rationalize it. Rats, probably, I thought. The Route 12 motor court had plenty of those. I'd pound on the wall and the tapping would stop for 5 minutes and then start again, slow and persistent-like, as if someone were trying to get my attention using Morse code that they didn't quite remember. I checked the exterior window of room 106. It was dark, heavily draped, had been painted over along the sill, cementing Duffy's claim that it was sealed. I mentioned it to Duffy once. He just grunted, "It's the pipes, Ian. Ignore it." But the pipes didn't whisper. I remember one night it was snowing, and the tapping had stopped. I was almost relieved until it was replaced by a sound that made my skin crawl. Muffled voices. Low, stressed, and indistinct, like listening to an argument through a thick brick wall, except my wall was just flimsy drywall. It sounded like two people, maybe a man and a woman. The tone was desperate, rising and falling in sharp, choked bursts. I threw off my blanket and put my ear to the wall. I heard pressure, pain, and a chaotic, unsettling energy, but I couldn't make out a single word, just that the intent was clear: distress. I sprang up, grabbing the employee master key, fully intending to swing open room 106 to confront whatever manager or idiot guest had decided to break the seal and stash themselves in the utility room. But when I got to the door, I paused. The deadbolt looked untouched. Decades of rust on the exterior plate. Even if someone had broken in, where was the sound coming from now? Standing directly outside the door, the sound was actually fainter than it had been through my bedroom wall. I retreated, baffled and increasingly nauseous. I knew how sound traveled. I knew a human voice when I heard one. There was no one in that room. The thought was heavy, physical. The air in my apartment felt cold and different, suddenly smelling less like old coffee and more like stale cigarette smoke, even though I didn't smoke. I couldn't leave, though. Quitting meant losing my apartment and the only paycheck I had. The fear for me was entirely secondary to the economic anxiety. The impossible phenomena from room 106 became another unwelcome roommate. Something I had to endure along with the leaky faucet and the broken thermostat. I became adept at blocking it out, trying to focus on balancing the ledger, but sometimes a clear word would cut through the din. And one night around 3:30 a.m., I was half dozing in the chair when the whispering spiked. I shot up, listening intently, and for a split second, I heard a clear, ragged male voice. It uttered a single chilling syllable. "Brenda." It sounded like a scream, swallowed by water. Then silence. Absolute, crushing silence. I knew then it wasn't rats or the pipes or managers. It was a loop, a sound clip from the past playing on a frequency only the drywall could pick up, or only I could hear. That, or I was losing my mind. It was a residual haunting, though, this desperate, echoing energy of a moment of crisis trapped in that dilapidated box of a room. It's possible, isn't it? I finally cornered Duffy the next morning, my eyes red from the lack of sleep. "Duffy, what happened in room 106? Can you just tell me?" He looked tired, older than his 60 years, and for once he wasn't looking at the ledger. "It was years ago, kid. A domestic thing. Bad time, bad woman. Brenda, I think. Never mind. Just forget it. It's the past. Let it be. We don't go in there. And kid, just ignore it. You're getting a good deal here. I tried. I really did. I just lived with the sounds for the next 2 months, trying to keep the image of whatever happened over there out of my head as I rang up truck drivers and salesmen. But one night, it ended. Not the noises, the job. A building inspector finally roused from their long slumber, condemned the entire office structure due to years of systemic neglect, a collapsing foundation, and a failure to address a major water main break. Duffy was given 48 hours to vacate and seal the buildings permanently. Which means, so did I. As I packed my last box of cheap novels, Duffy was standing guard in the hallway looking lost. I had to know. I pointed at the locked door of room 106. Since you're sealing everything forever, can I just look? Just once? Duffy hesitated, but then he unlocked the heavy deadbolt. The door creaked open, smelling musty and unused. It definitely wasn't a storage room. It was completely empty. No furniture, no boxes, just dust. I walked to the shared wall where I had heard the muffled cries, where I'd heard everything. And there it was, a large, ugly scorch mark low on the wall, as if someone had been pushed up against it, held there until it burned. I didn't touch anything or examine it further. It was so eerie, I decided to leave. Duffy cut my last check and I hit the road. I lived out of my car for a while, but eventually settled down, and any place I went after that was comparably better. All better than sleeping next to an empty room that was screaming at night. My father was a quiet man, a mechanic by trade who never wasted words. His messages were always brief, direct, and usually related to the state of my car's oil or the wisdom of saving money. When he died suddenly in 2018, the world didn't get quieter for me. It got deafeningly loud with things left unsaid. That's probably why what happened 2 years after his funeral felt so visceral. So entirely him. It was late, maybe 1 a.m., and I was driving home from visiting my sister in a small town about an hour north of my apartment. I was exhausted, cruising down a desolate stretch of highway. It was the type of road where the only lights are the stars and your own headlights. To keep myself awake, I had the radio blasting, cycling through stations that faded in and out of patches of static. I was somewhere between the local country station and a religious talk show when my car seemed to hit a sudden dense pocket of interference. The music didn't just fade out. It was instantly smothered by a violent, aggressive hiss. White noise so thick, it felt like I was driving through a cloud of television snow. I reached out to twist the dial, muttering about the lousy reception when a sound, impossibly clear, cut through the electrical storm. It was a cough, dry, low, and distinct. It was the way my father cleared his throat, right before he was about to say something serious. My hand froze inches from the radio knob. I could feel my pulse hammering against my temples. I thought, no, I'm exhausted. But then a voice came. It wasn't distorted, hollow, or processed. It was him. It had the same low, gravelly timbre and the familiar New England cadence that softened the letter R. It sounded as if he were sitting in the passenger seat, not miles away or years gone. You still got that little rattling in the front end, kid. That was it. That was the whole message. A mundane 3-second observation about the minor chronic suppression issue my old sedan had always had. A sound he had often scolded me about. It was such a perfect, unnecessary, fatherly comment that it shattered my skepticism instantly. My breath hitched in my throat. I wasn't scared in the typical way. I was terrified by the profound intrusion of reality into the impossible. That was his voice, giving me car advice. My reaction wasn't reasoned. It was pure adrenalized panic. My immediate involuntary thought was that whatever had accessed his voice was in the car with me, using the only language it knew I would recognize, mechanics and worry. I didn't try to answer. I didn't try to turn the volume up. I screamed a short, sharp sound that felt trapped in my chest, and I violently yanked the entire radio assembly, an old aftermarket unit, out of the dashboard. The wires ripped, the antenna cable snapped, and the relentless static instantly died, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breath in the wind rushing past the windows. I drove the rest of the way home in silence, the dead, dark radio dangling by the frayed wires. I was shaking, less from the fact of a ghost, and more from the terror of the immediate, personal connection. Honestly, I was just out of sorts. But the moment I parked in my driveway, the adrenaline faded, replaced by a cold, stomach-dropping wave of crushing regret. What had I done? He had spoken, he'd reached out, and my response, the last thing that I would ever send him, was violence. He hadn't sent a dire warning or a cry for help. He'd sent a mundane, worried piece of advice. He'd been concerned about the rattling in my front end. More importantly, he'd been connected. I scrambled into the floor well, my fingers trembling, trying to find the broken connection. I found the main power harness and frantically jammed the wires back together. The dashboard display flickered. Success. I powered the radio back on. The speaker roared to life with the same thick, angry static. My hands were shaking too hard to try and tune it precisely. I fumbled for the dial, turning it millimeter by millimeter, listening to the white noise, begging for a crack, a signal, a cough, anything. "Dad," I whispered, leaning in close to the speaker. "Dad, it's me. I'm sorry. I hear you. What about the front end? Was it the tie rod? Please, just tell me what to look for." I sat there for almost an hour, hunched in the dark car, talking to the static, to the dead air, pleading for another 3 seconds of communication. I heard interference, crackling, and the faint whisper of actual broadcast stations trying to push through. But I never heard the distinct dry cough again. I never heard the familiar gravel of his voice. The connection was broken, ripped out by my own panic, and lost forever in the endless sea of radio frequencies. I learned 2 terrible things that night. 1, the dead speak sometimes. And 2, when they do, you might be too scared to listen. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. Thanks for joining. Whether it's your first time or you're a regular, your support means the world over here. We've got brand new episodes every Friday night, and keep those eyes open for those deep sleep videos throughout the week. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll never miss a thing. Special thanks to the Darkest Hour channel members, Lori TESDAHL, Sarah Marie, Robert Bailey, T. Colt Daddy Eagle, Mallory Dominguez, Gary Watkins, Pilar Guillou, Traden Wixon, Larry Hill, Ripley, Jojo Starcher, Mary Patrick, Debbie Lafreniere, Julie Bordelais, Jennifer Beck, Marina Lachner, Make Hamilton Home, Evan Pratt, Mary Heinlein, Catherine Yes I'm the Real Katie Isabel, Landshark, Danielle Hecht, Mama P, Keziah Peterson, Amber Baker, Chris Lazone, Cara Gios, Marvin Allen, Forgotten Ruins TV, Ravenwolf, Carlos, Stacia Gillette, Nate Black, Jill Harper, Kathy Balkenbush, Cosmic Chick, Sierra Guerrero, Deanna Kuzma, Nathan Bremer, Demian Forrester, Nazi K, Angel Roman, Trisha Hardis, Sherry Gannon, Alexis Foster, On Pulse, Bat Lily Bates, Scott Horn, Kathy McGuire, and Heather. A big thanks to those who shared their stories, and a huge shout out to all of our patrons, Tracy S., Mary H., Tanya F., Tamara K., Monica L., Zoe Watt, Shelley B., Donald C., Marion T., Rat Girl, Alicia S., Aaron G., Nikki H., Mr. Revenant, Naz K., Brendan G., Paul T., Nicholas C., Tony P., Lizanne, Arlene F., Adrian, T.F. Parham, Jason G., Lori T., Bobo Jenkins, Rachel S., Linda W., Eric, and Lynn Driftless. If you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining our Patreon or becoming a channel member. Check out patreon.com/The Darkest Hour or click the link in the description to learn more. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, Amanda, darkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour, YT. Stay spooky.